Welcome and hello. My name is Sasha Ponappa, and my name sign is like this. And I am the Executive Director of Deaf Organization Fund, the DOF. I am a brown woman with shoulder length hair, and I'm wearing a black shirt with a green sweater, and behind me are different plants and artwork. Welcome to today's webinar, Federal Actions Impacting Deaf Nonprofits. We've noticed that, everything that's happening in the federal government really is impacting many of us, including all of the executive orders, unsure about the changes in Section 504, the changes with Americans with Disability Act, the Department of Education, all of those things that are happening. And that's really impacting us personally, as well as our family, our friends, and the people that we serve, and of course, the nonprofits that we work for. You know, This is not the first time that nonprofits and marginalized communities have been impacted like this. This happens repeatedly. And as we look back at the marginalized communities that we have, history, we've been fighting for our rights, and we often have to keep in mind that we do win. Now, with our new climate, we are going to get together and fight for our rights once again for our community. And those rights will continue and we will prevail. So today's webinar, you are going to hear from two of my dear friends, Maria Wilson and Bobby Siebert. Both of them work for Communication Service for the Deaf, CSD. Both of them have legal and compliance expertise. They will join us and have information of what, they're not going to have the information of what you can do as a nonprofit. There's so many things and there's so much information out there that can be overwhelming. So what they're here to do instead is to explain about the overview of the climate, what's happening. What are some of the options that you have, the nonprofits, and the risks involved with your nonprofits? Maria is a deaf attorney and a passionate about human rights. Her role at CSD is the chief legal officer and as well as the board secretary, and she's on the DOF board. She graduated with her degree of honor from the University of Texas, and she got her JD degree from the University of Houston Law School. Bobby started his journey with CSD 10 years ago, and he's worked his way up to the role that he is, which is VP of contracts and compliance for CSD. And she ensures that everything that we've got, ethical compliance, etc. And he works with Maria to make sure that everything is taken care of. And so he has a master's in business administration from Gallaudet University. When they come to talk about legal advice, tax, investing advice, and things, that's not what they're here for. It's just informational things. They're not actually advisors. So your organizations, if you need specific legal or accounting advice, please talk to a professional, an accountant, or a lawyer that you're needing. So this information is not meant as advice for you. So I now welcome Maria and Bobby. Thank you both for joining us.
Hello.
Yes, hi. My name is Maria Wilson, and my sign name is like this. And I am a white woman with brown hair that has a little swoop over my forehead. I'm wearing a green shirt, and you can see curtains and blinds, and then there's some artwork behind me as well. And I'm very happy to be here with you.
Hello, I'm Bobby Siebert. I am a white male with short brown hair and a goatee. I am dressed in a mauve button-up dress shirt with a white background behind me and a floor lamp with some books in a bookshelf. I look forward to this discussion and speaking about all of these issues with you.
This is Sasha. Wonderful. I'm going to go ahead and turn my video off and turn the presentation over to the two of you.
All right. As Sasha just explained, since January, there have been many changes in the federal government, and many of them have big impacts on NPOs, nonprofit organizations. The changes are ongoing. There are new updates every day, and each of your organizations are different. Your goals, programs, and the people you serve, how you fund your programs, which laws apply to you, all of that varies. So our goal today is to provide you with background information and actions and tools that you all can use to make the best decisions for your organization and navigate these uncertain and challenging times. I'd like to start with a quick basic review of our federal government. And this is important background information to help you understand how these changes affect us. Executive order, which I'll summarize as EO, and Section 504, some background, some history on all of these things. So we have three branches of the government. The first is the executive branch, which is led by the United States President, supported by the Vice President and Cabinet. Um, the President leads this, and he's the Commander in Chief of the U.S. Armed Forces. The President also has the power to issue executive orders, which we'll discuss in the next slide. The next branch is the legislative branch, which is made up of the House of Representatives and the Senate, which is also known as Congress. Congress passes many laws and has several other powers. Section 504, which is a part of the law that's called the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, was enacted by Congress. The third branch is the judicial branch, which consists of the federal court systems. At the top, you have the Superior Court, Supreme Court, and their job is to interpret the meaning of federal laws and the Constitution as they apply to cases. If there are lawsuits, they take this and make the determinations as follows suit. Any legal actions, they have to determine if the Constitution has been followed or has been breached. Now with Section 504 and executive orders, there are many disagreements that are happening right now. So the judicial branch is handling that. We'll talk more about that later. Each branch has specific powers over the others, which creates a system of checks and balances. Next slide. So now we'll talk about executive orders, or EOs. As I just previously stated, Congress's job is to pass laws, and then the president of the executive branch is responsible for executing these laws. Executive orders are one tool that the president can use to direct the federal government to take specific actions to carry out laws. The scope and power of EOs are limited. For example, an EO cannot override the Constitution or federal laws and its statutes. There are ways that an EO can be changed or stopped. Some examples are when a president is able to reverse a previous president's executive orders. So, for example, President Trump could remove or reverse prior executive orders. Also, Congress can impede executive orders by passing new legislation. Courts also, Congress can pass new laws that take away funding that will block that executive order and makes it more difficult. And then the judicial branch here, if a court has a suit against an executive order, it could be determined that it's in violation of the Constitution or federal law, and it can be blocked. I'll now turn it over to Maria, who will speak more about current executive orders.
Thank you. So here we talk about all of the executive orders that have been presented by the last presidency, the last few presidencies. Now, remember that each presidency has a term of 4 years. And on this chart, you see from left to right, you have George W. Bush. His first term, he did 173 executive orders. His second term, 118. Obama's first term, he did 147 executive orders, and his second term, 129 orders. Trump's first term, he did 220 executive orders. Biden's one term was 162 executive orders. And now Trump, his second term, so as of January 20th, which he was just installed in January 20th, he has now entered 103 executive orders, and that's only in 60 days. So that means for the remaining of his 4 years, he could do a lot more than that. And so this slide just kind of shows how quickly executive orders get signed and stated, and it can get overwhelming. Many of the executive orders are being challenged in court at this time. Some have a temporary hold put on them, but it's going to take time to see how these executive orders play out in court. As Bobby was talking about, there are different levels in the court, the federals, the state, the Supreme, etc. So it's going to take a while. Eventually, we'll see the full impact of his executive orders, but right now we just don't know what's happening, and we don't know what that impact on the NPOs are going to be. So there are a lot of executive orders that can impact nonprofit, but these are 8 categories that we felt were the most relevant to our deaf nonprofits. It also depends on what kind of services that you offer. So let me go through each of these categories. The first category is the federal government. The next is diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility, DEIA. And we'll talk a little bit more about that next. Immigration, LGBTQ plus, environment, census and community engagement, faith-based groups, and others, which is a smaller group such as the arts, libraries, foreign aid. If your nonprofit focuses on any of these 8 categories, then I really encourage you to research more on those executive orders. There are some great resources from the National Council of Nonprofits. They have a spreadsheet that really can help you to analyze all of these executive orders and how it might impact your organization and what the challenges are happening in the court situation. And, you know, they are great about updating these slides. So we have some links here that we'll provide for these resources that have, and you all be able to see that. You can see that link right there listed on the slide that you can find updated information.
So, as Maria explained, there are many, many different executive orders and different topics, but those that relate to DEI will impact deaf organizations the most. You have probably seen a lot of news and a lot of talk about this topic. The prior president, President Biden, during his time, he implemented many executive orders that promoted and supported DEI efforts in hiring, grants, education, and training. Now, once Trump became president, he has reversed and removed and changed those executive orders and done a huge change. The A that's added, DEI and A, the A is for accessibility. DEIA, those will impact deaf nonprofits the most. DEI touches on many different areas of nonprofit organizations, whether that be your programs, your strategies, your hiring practices, all of that will be impacted. Not a lot is clearly defined yet, but we do know it's hard right now to really track and follow what these executive orders mean and how they will apply to your nonprofit organization. Also, what you should do. The Trump administration has not given any kind of clear definition of what DEIA means, which has made things difficult for nonprofits, corporations, and private foundations to decide what to do in these times. Because it's so vague, it has created a chilling effect where nonprofits and organizations are feeling pressured and stressed, not knowing what to do. If DEI, with DEI being removed, they don't know what to do in order to avoid any negative impacts or loss of funding. There's a lot of uncertainty. There may be direct impacts on nonprofit organizations. Significantly, contracts and grants that support the advancement of DEI, DEIA will probably be cut. Requirements for federal contractors needing to follow specific requirements, those will probably change. Federal contractors that support diversity will probably be removed, cut, or banned. Affirmative action. The policy that was set forth to increase opportunities for people who have historically faced discrimination, such as hiring initiatives to help support specific demographics. Affirmative action, that program, if a contract has that, it will probably be targeted and they will be penalized or have some sort of consequence enacted. One potential new requirement would be for contractors to commit to comply with the federal anti-discrimination law, which is new. Also to promise that their organization is not running any DEI programs that would be in violation of the anti-discrimination law. Federal grants and contracts have an application procedure. They have specific requirements and criteria. The DEIA included may eliminate all of that. Those considerations may no longer be made. I want to emphasize again that this is an ongoing and continuing and evolving process. There may be new EOs related to this topic, Federal agencies are watching these EOs to see how they'll change their guidance for their organizations and contractors before they delineate new instructions and guidance. Just as Maria mentioned, there are suits being filed and fought in court, and the decisions are currently being made whether they will be blocked or continue on. We encourage you to keep a close eye on things as they change and evolve.
So, a significant part of an NPO's budget is really supported by federal funding. And so you're probably at most risk by these executive orders. Now, suppose I'm a nonprofit and you get minimal or no federal funding. Could I still be impacted by these executive orders? Unfortunately, the answer to that is yes. A nonprofit could still potentially be affected by this. There are a couple of ways that this could happen, though. So, for example, one example is suppose your organization has a small program that receives federal funding. That executive order might require your entire organization to comply. A good example is an executive order regarding DEIA. One thing that the government has been looking at is as a whole, they're looking at an organization as a whole, your mission, your website, your programs, your social media, etc., to see if that organization is using prohibited DEIA language. Another example is maybe you don't receive any direct federal funding, but your funder might be impacted. And that funder could be a corporation, could be another nonprofit or a private foundation, excuse me. Maybe it's a state agency. And those could be impacted by the executive order because they have to comply with the executive order, which then would require your organization to comply with an executive order, even though it's not directly federal funding. Another example is as a 501c3, the federal government can revoke your tax exempt status if your nonprofit doesn't have, or let's just say your nonprofit is created for an illegal purpose and participants are doing illegal activities. For example, if the federal government determines that DEI activities are illegal, and this could then take away your IRS tax status. I'm not aware of that happening as of yet, and it's unclear whether or not it would, but there is discussion that it might actually happen. And so they're warning people that this could happen in the future. So again, I want to emphasize that, think about what's happening out there in those NP and those executive orders. They, they have different issues. So the next we're going to share about different actions your organizations can take to navigate all of this uncertainty during all of these executive orders.
We're encouraging different organizations here to really take this time to prepare and get your programs ready for what may be ahead. The first thing you should do is to analyze all of your programs and consider some possible adjustments that could be made, thinking of different EOs and their requirements in mind and keeping those in mind. Anything DEIA related in documentation, policies, procedures, hiring practices, your website, communications, your social media. Identify where that is and where changes could be made, knowing that the requirements for DEIA could change, so you'll be ready to enact those changes. And then with that, review all of your contracts and grant agreements. Take an inventory Do a thorough review of funders, foundations, uh, corporations. Be aware of all of the funders and make note. I also recommend you look at your terms and conditions for anything that could be terminated and compliance related. Understand federal regulations that may apply if you have federal grants. Look at your contract agreements, which are usually run by the 2CFR Part 200. They're governed by that. Look at which version applies to your grant. Budgeting, accounting, procurement with federal grant funding, your cost principle, the costs where you're allowed to make purchases, that's all under the 2CFR Part 200. Now, 2CFR Part 200 over time has been updated and changed. So make sure you're looking, when looking at your grant, look to see which version applies to your grant specifically. Also, if you have any federal contracts, those are governed by Federal Acquisition Regulation, FAR. Review your contracts and grant agreements for closeouts, costs, and the appeals process. Your organization, if funding is cut, you may be able to get reimbursed for specific allowable costs that you spent money on and that you should and have a right to be paid for. For example, if it's terminated and you have to pay for certain things, certain expenses in order to close that grant out, you have a right to get reimbursed for those costs. So be aware of those and be ready to know what should be paid back. The federal government has made a lot of changes, so you also want to look at your grants and contracts and their access to funds, what that will look like, if there will be a change. Communicate with your funder to make sure that you'll still have access to these funds with the impending changes. There's a cost approval process, and that may change. If you're not aware and you continue on with your spending as is, and then you're ready to be reimbursed for the costs, they'll say, no, you haven't been through our new cost approval process, and you'll end up losing out on those funds. So keep a close watch on those. Federal contracts and grants have an agency, or each agency has its own compliance process, grievance process. So look at that particular agency and look at their grievance process to be aware. So if you have any type of complaint you want to make, you'll be ready to file that grievance. After reviewing all of your contracts, next you'll want to do a risk assessment and scenario planning. All of your grants and contracts are ranked using two factors. One is based on importance, based on the value of that grant or contract, that amount, whether it's high or low. Also, how it aligns with your organization's mission and goals. If it aligns with your mission, then it should take higher priority. If not, then of course, rank it appropriately. The second factor of assessment is at the risk level. What are the odds that that contract or grant will be terminated? Take a closer look at how the program compares with the EOs that are in place and figure out the risk level. and then rate them accordingly. If you have one contract that's really important and the risk is also high, that should be top priority. If it's low in value and low in risk, then you can deprioritize that. High risk contracts and grants, you should start to create a portfolio of action for those and do scenario planning. For example, try to envision your highest and most important contract grant being terminated immediately. What would you do? What actions would you need to take? What are your options? Some examples, you may change your budget. You may have to downsize your spending. You may have to take a second look at your staff and their salaries, see if there's any changes you could make there. Also, programs, are there other types of funds out there that are available that could support instead of this federal grant? If the program is really important to your organization and it can't be lost, consider maybe a reduction in the program services to keep it going and to keep it sustained, but at a reduced amount. These are the things you can be ready with to respond quickly if you have to make any changes to keep your organizations alive and navigate through this time. Your streams of revenue. Organizations that heavily rely on one or two revenue streams will be impacted the greatest by any changes. So try to look for ways to diversify, add more streams of revenue to help your organization become more resilient so that you'll have more options and easily navigate these changes. Your organization can look for new or different revenue streams, like, for example, individual donors. Do some networking, share your organization stories, reach out and talk about your services, why they're critical, and the challenges that you're facing now, and ask for their support and help. Contact them through email or in person. You can host events as well, but reach out to garner this support. Other options are to explore corporate funding, corporate sponsorships, also private foundations. With the changes happening federally, there may be decreased support for missions with DEIA, so funding will decrease. But that also may mean that corporations and private founders will try to take up that slack, and they may invest and donate more money. Do your research, find those different funding opportunities. Where whoever's the best fit, pursue them, apply, build relationships with these funders to try to diversify your income streams and to make your organization's funding position stronger, financial position stronger. We also encourage you to think about enlisting legal counsel for your organization. You have a unique situation, and these federal changes, you need to know the best decisions that you can make, the best actions you can take specific to your organization. Hiring legal counsel to analyze your organization, they can give you the best advice. We recognize that many of your organizations may not have the budget for any new legal counsel expenses. There are some firms that offer pro bono, completely free hours of their time for consultation. You can ask if that is an option for your organization. The National Council of Nonprofits has a really good list of resources, different organizations that offer pro bono support. So you could look into DOF resources link. They have a list of good resources there that you can choose from.
Another option is to talk with your funders. What are their guidances? Maybe they have resources and networks that you can benefit from and access. Check in with other nonprofit organizations, especially those that are doing the same type of services and using the same resources that you are. What are they doing? For example, related to the DEI executive order, we did some research of what other nonprofits did and the approaches that they took. And there was a lot of variety there. Some have removed all references to DEI on their websites and social media. Some have made changes to the language and the specific words that they've used to make it more broad. Some have closed that specific program that they used for federal funds. They just stopped that program. And for some nonprofits, they felt that DEI really was their entire identity, their values, and they wanted to preserve that and keep that. And so they just stopped using federal funding in order to continue with that. Those are just some examples and decisions that not only your nonprofit could make, but it really depends on your situation and your unique circumstances. But understand that not many nonprofits have the ability or the privilege to just close down a program. And again, you know, do some research, find some legal expertise to help you and to give you advice to help you figure out and analyze what situation is best for you, and have your own legal counsel that specializes in nonprofit. Stay informed. Monitor the work of organizations like the National Council for Nonprofits and all of the other agencies and figure out what they're doing. Monitor the legal actions that are happening against the executive orders that are happening. See what other legal entities are doing to take it to, keep in mind with the executive orders and how they can work around them. Strengthen your advocacy and public policy efforts. Sometimes nonprofits think that they can't talk with their representatives. They're scared of doing those types of things. And they don't want to talk with lobbyists, but you can. And honestly, you should share your story with of your nonprofit with these lobbyists. Tell them how these executive orders have impacted your organization. Expand more on what your service organization is providing and how many people are truly depending upon everything that you've done in order to maintain your operations. Just be persistent. Things can move fast, but be patient and persistent and coordinate with other nonprofits that are in the same boat as you. Okay, that kind of concludes our presentation on executive orders. But now I want to shift a bit to talk about a different topic. And I want to spotlight a very important issue that's happening currently. The issue is related to Section 504. Section 504 is very important. It protects people with disabilities from discrimination in places that receive federal funding. For the deaf community, Section 504 is what provides us access, communication access, such as interpreters, captioning, in places like hospitals, schools. Currently, there's about 17 states that have sued the federal government trying to dismantle the Section 504. And these attorney generals they say that 504 violates the Constitution. There's a lawsuit called Texas versus Becerra. And some states have said, oh, we're going to back out of that case. But as of today, nobody has. On February 19th, the state attorneys filed a report, and that a report explained that their goal was for Section 504 to only apply to very specific programs such as VR. vocational rehabilitation, meaning that 504 will no longer apply to healthcare, housing, education, and they've agreed to put that lawsuit on hold. But honestly, the lawsuit is not done yet. It's going to continue. I feel as though this is really important for our community to monitor these lawsuits. And we need to complain because if that happens and 504 is dismantled, that's going to have a terrible impact on our community, for the deaf community, and all of people with disabilities.
Right. 504, yeah, there's a huge threat or a huge impact on our community. And you may wonder what you can do. What actions can you take? I'm going to go through a few. Monitor, keep a close eye on an organization called Disability Rights Education and Defense Fund, DREDF. Their website lists information and resources and things that you can do. Keep an eye out on that. Also, Deaf Equity has their own information in American Sign Language. I recommend you look at that. There's a link in DOF's list of resources. The next status update is scheduled for April 21st. So keep an eye out to see what happens next with that case. Section 504 is going to have an extreme impact on our community. So look and see how it will impact your services and your local community and what can be done to help if it is dismantled, what resources and supports you can offer or networking. Set up a response plan so that you're ready to support the community. Also, your state attorney general, your particular state's attorney general, reach out to them. Let them know who you are, that you're a person with disabilities, you're deaf. Explain why Section 504 is so crucial to you, how it helps you, why it's so important. And if your state attorney general is a part of that lawsuit, let them know to please back out, to not continue with it, to protect Section 504. If your state's attorney general is not a part of it, still go ahead and reach out and explain the importance and ask them to help you protect Section 504. DREDF has a great template or form that you can use to email or call your attorney general. So look for that resource as well on their site. Finally, we want to make sure that our community are all aware of what's going on and how all of this can impact your rights to access and communication. And your community, the people that you serve. Spread this information, get the word out, make sure everyone knows what's going on and how they can help. Show them these resources that I outlined before and encourage them to reach out to the Attorney General. Get loud. Together, we need to unite to fight against this dismantling of our important right.
Wow. Thank you so much for all of this information, the resources, and all of the tidbits about how we as deaf nonprofits and what the risk is involved with everything that's happening with 504. So, through this presentation, we got a lot of questions, and now we're going to answer some of those questions. I do want to warn you, the people that are watching, you will not have an opportunity to raise your hand, turn your video on to sign your questions. You must put your questions into the Q&A at the bottom. And we do have a few questions that we're going to try and answer before we wrap up. All right. The first question, and I'll sign the question out and then give Maria and Bobby a moment to think about and respond to those questions. The first question is: there are so many new executive orders that are later overruled by the Supreme Court and then reinstated and then slowed down. So, how do we deal with this? What are your thoughts? This is Maria. I get it. I'm feeling this is very frustrating as well, trying to understand what's happening with the executive orders. Every time you try to understand one, another one comes up. But there's still a lot that we don't know. There's not a specific timeline related to each of the executive orders and what the final conclusion will be, or if there will be a final conclusion, and what's going to happen up later. So, really, you just have to continue to monitor that resource, and we'll continue to share it with the National Council of Nonprofits. And they're a great place to keep an eye on and bookmark to watch that. You know, they explain about how different things can impact nonprofits, what happens if, what do you do now, etc. So I would definitely keep an eye on that and see. And website. Again, if you have an attorney that specializes in nonprofit, they can also help you with what to do with different executive orders.
Right. I think that was said perfectly. It's challenging. Your organization has to be flexible and ready with a plan A or a plan B. A, if things stay as is, and B, if there's a change. So you can shift either way. Again, having the risk assessment and figuring out your options, it'll help you be ready to navigate those changes. Be flexible.
I agree. This is Sasha. You mentioned the National Council for Nonprofits, and that's under the DOF resources, but also your local state council of nonprofits really could help you. So check out that information that is specific to your state as you're working in these areas. All right, next question. Is there a way? This question came from Patrick. Is there a way for nonprofits that they can fall back on the Americans with Disability Act from 1990 for funding and claim that it's not DEI, but it's law, even though we do support DEI? This is Maria. If you remember when the new president first started, there was a lot of federal firings that were happening,
Layoffs.
and many people were fired, and they were wanting to close different offices. And people with disabilities got thrown into this with DEIA. But then they had to go back and backtrack and put accessibility back in there because of Law Section 504, because of the ADA. And so that's going to continue to come up where it's going to happen, and then they're going to have to go retroactively. And I think that with Section 504 doesn't mean that nobody's going to touch the ADA. They're trying to, and we're trying to monitor that as well. But it really just depends on your funding, where the funding comes from, who the funding comes from, as to whether or not you can use ADA to reframe DEI. But still, it's tough. And unfortunately, all of this is just all messed up right now. And we're just going to have to keep watching to see what happens.
Right.
Bobby, anything else you want to add? Okay,
No.
great. Thank you so much, Maria. We'll move on to the next question. All right, the next question from Francis. How will you cover the impact of federal changes that they have at the state level of funding? And how does that trickle onto state level directives, etc.?
Well, right now we're focusing on federal level executive orders, but yes, we know that those changes can also influence various other levels like states or even private foundations and corporations that receive federal funding. It is possible that they're receiving these funding having to follow certain requirements, and those requirements have to be passed on to the organizations that they fund. So it really depends. If you receive any funding at a state level, communicate with them, keep aware of any changes, any requirements that you need to be aware of. Stay open and aware at the state level.
This is Sasha. I would say, talk with your funders. Any part of the funding that you're getting from the state, ask them, is any of that federal money? Or is the state just a pass-through entity, meaning the federal gives the money to the state for the state to then pass out to local organizations? So ask your funders at the state level whether or not the money that they're receiving is coming from the federal government, and then follow their guidelines. This is Maria. I would just emphasize, talk to your grant manager, your contract managers. They should be your best friend. They're also your best resources because they know what it is. So your first step should be talking with them to get more information. This is Sasha. Okay, I believe that those are all the questions that we have. Thank you both, Maria and Bobby, for taking the time, for coming and explaining in ASL what's happening out there with the executive orders and how it impacts nonprofits. So again, I want to thank you both for being here. Yeah, well, I'm happy to be here, and I hope that this was helpful to everyone.
Thank you for the opportunity. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. All right. So I know Bobby and Maria, they're amazing, and they gave you all of this information about what's happening, what you can do, etc. They talked about different resources, tips, strategies that you should consider. So there are two ways for you to find those resources. So there's bit.ly.dof, and you can see our website, and then there's a link with all of the different resources there. Or if you have your phone handy, you can click on the QR code, and then you can find those resources. Some of you, have talked about your strategies that are going to be included in that document. So thank you. DOF is committed to hosting webinars on an ongoing basis to provide access for information so you know what's happening. Our next webinar is on April 24th, and it's called The Deaf Nonprofit Crisis. And we will have 3 deaf executive directors from 3 different deaf nonprofits. And they will share their journeys, their struggles, and how they are navigating the federal actions happening with their nonprofits. So please register and come to this. You can use this same QR code, which will take you to the bit.ly link, and then there's a link to register for our next webinar, which will be happening next month, April 24th at 2 p.m. Eastern. We hope to see you there. Once this webinar closes, you will see a pop-up screen, which is a survey with just a few questions, and we're asking for your feedback on your webinar experience. That will help us as we continue to plan for future webinars. So if you could please take the time to fill that out. If you don't have the time, don't worry. It's also going to be emailed to you, and in that email, you'll have the opportunity to fill out the survey. This recording, the FAQ document, the slides will be shared to each of you within the next 2 weeks through the DOF website or via email, and you can access it at both ways. So thank you again for coming, and we will look forward to being in touch with you. Bye-bye now.